The morning sun painted the quiet streets of West Hollywood in golden light. Most people were still inside, getting ready for another day. But one man was already on the road, and he wasn't looking for peace. Tommy Blade Rodriguez had been riding his black Harley-Davidson since dawn. The engine roared like an angry beast as he cruised through the expensive neighborhood. His leather jacket was covered in patches from his motorcycle club, the Steel Wolves. People who knew about these things would cross the street when they saw those patches. At 36 years old, Tommy had spent most of his adult life making people afraid. He was tall and thick, with arms covered in tattoos that told stories of violence and rebellion. His beard was wild and unkempt, and his eyes held a cold look that made children hide behind their mothers. He loved that fear. It made him feel powerful. The Steel Wolves weren't just weekend riders who liked to dress tough. They were the real deal. Tommy had done time in prison twice. Once for beating up a store owner who wouldn't pay protection money, and once for stealing motorcycles. But those days in jail only made him harder, meaner. Now he was one of the club's top enforcers, the guy they called when someone needed to be taught a lesson. As he rode through the wealthy neighborhood, Tommy felt angry about all the nice houses and perfect lawns. These people had everything handed to them, he thought. They lived in their safe little bubble while guys like him had to fight for every dollar. The anger was always there, burning in his chest like acid. Some days it was worse than others, and today was one of those days. His girlfriend had left him the night before. She packed her bags while he was passed out drunk on the couch and took his TV with her. When he woke up and found the note she left, he threw his beer bottle at the wall so hard it left a hole in the cheap drywall. The note said she was tired of his anger, tired of being scared all the time. She said he needed help, but Tommy didn't see it that way. She was just weak like everyone else. The Steel Wolves had a saying, "The strong take what they want and the weak learn to stay out of the way." Tommy lived by those words. In his world, showing mercy was showing weakness, and weak people got eaten alive. He slowed his bike as he passed a row of houses that looked like something from a magazine. Perfect green lawns, expensive cars in the driveways, and not a piece of trash anywhere. It made him sick. These people probably never had to worry about paying rent or putting food on the table. They probably called the police if they saw someone, like him riding through their precious neighborhood. That's when he saw her. A beautiful golden retriever was sitting on a front lawn, enjoying the morning sunshine. Her fur was clean and shiny, and she had a red collar that looked new. The dog wasn't tied up or behind a fence. She was just sitting there peacefully, watching the world go by with friendly brown eyes. Tommy felt that familiar darkness rising in his chest. Here was another example of how easy these rich people had it. They could afford to buy expensive dogs and let them run free because they lived in their safe little world. Meanwhile, guys like him had to fight and scratch for everything they got on them. The house behind the dog was smaller than the others on the street, but it still looked nice. Clean white paint, a small but well-kept garden, and a simple front porch. There was an old pickup truck in the driveway, nothing fancy, but it was clean and well-maintained. No fancy cars or obvious signs of wealth, which made Tommy think the owner might be someone who wouldn't cause him trouble. He stopped his bike about 50 feet away and sat there, engine idling, watching the dog. She turned her head toward him, and her tail started wagging. Even from this distance, he could see she was friendly. Probably one of those dogs that loved everyone, the kind that would walk up to a stranger expecting pets and treats. That friendly nature only made Tommy angrier. Everything was so easy for this dog. She had a comfortable home, regular meals, and people who cared about her. She didn't have to worry about anything. She could just sit in the sun and be happy while Tommy had to deal with angry club members, unpaid debts, and a life that seemed to get harder every year. In his twisted mind, the innocent dog represented everything he hated about people who had it better than him. She was clean while he felt dirty inside. She was loved while he felt forgotten. She was peaceful while he carried rage everywhere he went. Tommy revved his engine, and the sound echoed off the quiet houses. A few curtains moved in nearby windows as people looked out to see what was making the noise. The dog's ears perked up at the sound, but she didn't look scared. She just seemed curious, tilting her head in that way dogs do when they're trying to understand something. He could ride away. He could leave this peaceful neighborhood and find somewhere else to vent his anger. But that burning feeling in his chest was getting stronger, and he needed to do something about it. In his world, when you felt powerless, you found someone weaker and reminded them who was in charge. The street was empty except for him and the dog. No joggers, no people walking to work, no kids heading to school. Just him and this innocent animal that had never done anything wrong to anyone. But in Tommy's mind, her crime was existing in a world that had been cruel to him. He gripped the handlebars tighter and felt the engine vibrating through his body. The steel wolves had taught him that respect came through fear, and fear came through action. You couldn't just talk tough. You had to show people what you were capable of doing. The dog was still watching him, her tail wagging slowly now. She probably thought he might come over and pet her. Dogs were like that, always trusting, always believing that people were good. It was that innocence that made Tommy's anger burn even hotter. He looked around one more time to make sure the street was empty. A couple of houses had cars in the driveways, but he didn't see anyone outside. This was his chance to do something that would make him feel powerful again, something that would remind him that he was the predator, not the prey. Tommy had no idea that his next decision would change everything. He had no idea who owned the gentle dog that sat peacefully on the lawn, trusting the world to treat her kindly. He had no idea that some acts of cruelty create consequences that reach far beyond what the cruel person ever imagined. All he knew was that he was angry, and there was something beautiful and innocent in front of him that he could destroy. In his simple, brutal way of thinking, that was enough reason to act. The engine roared louder as he prepared to move forward, completely unaware that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his violent life. Tommy twisted the throttle and felt the motorcycle surge forward. The beautiful golden retriever looked up as the roaring machine approached, her ears perking up with curiosity rather than fear. She had lived a sheltered life filled with kindness, so the idea that someone might want to hurt her never crossed her innocent mind. The dog's name was Honey, though Tommy didn't know that. She was a rescue who had been saved from a terrible situation 3 years ago. Her previous owners had kept her chained in a backyard, barely fed and never loved. When she was finally rescued, she was thin and scared of everything, but patience and love had healed her broken spirit, turning her into the gentle, trusting soul that now sat peacefully on the lawn. Honey had learned to love the morning sunshine. Every day she would sit in the same spot, watching the neighborhood wake up. She loved seeing the joggers pass by, the kids walking to school, and the neighbors heading to work. Most people would smile and wave at her, and some would stop to give her a quick pet. In her simple dog mind, the world was full of good people who liked her. As Tommy's bike got closer, Honey stood up and wagged her tail. She thought he might be another friendly person who wanted to say hello. Her past trauma had been healed so completely that she no longer remembered what cruelty looked like. All she saw was another human, and humans meant love and treats and gentle hands. But Tommy wasn't slowing down. If anything, he was speeding up. The rage that had been building in his chest for years was about to explode, and this innocent dog was just unlucky enough to be in his path. In his twisted thinking, hurting something beautiful would somehow make him feel better about his ugly life. Mrs. Patterson from across the street was making coffee in her kitchen when she heard the motorcycle engine getting louder. She looked out her window and saw the biker heading straight toward the golden retriever. At first, she thought he would turn or stop. People didn't just run over dogs in broad daylight, especially not in their quiet neighborhood. But as the seconds passed, it became clear that the biker had no intention of stopping. Mrs. Patterson dropped her coffee mug and ran toward her front door, but she was too far away to do anything. All she could do was watch in horror as the scene unfolded. Tommy aimed his bike directly at Honey. The front wheel clipped her side with a sickening thud that echoed off the quiet houses. The impact sent the gentle dog tumbling across the grass. Her peaceful morning shattered in an instant of senseless violence. She let out a cry of pain and confusion that would haunt the witnesses for weeks to come. The sound of Honey hitting the ground was worse than Mrs. Patterson had imagined. It wasn't just the physical impact. It was the sound of innocence being destroyed by cruelty, of trust being broken by hatred. She had heard that sound before, years ago when her own childhood dog had been hit by a car. But this was different. This was deliberate. Tommy didn't stop after hitting Honey. Instead, he slowed down just enough to turn around and look at what he had done. The dog was lying on her side, trying to get up but struggling because her left leg was injured. Her tail wasn't wagging anymore. Instead, she was whimpering and looking around desperately for help, for someone to explain why this terrible thing had happened to her. Seeing the dog's pain and confusion, Tommy felt a sick satisfaction. This was power. This was what it felt like to be in control. For a few seconds, he wasn't the guy whose girlfriend had left him, or the guy who couldn't pay his bills, or the guy who felt like the world was against him. He was the one causing pain instead of feeling it. He revved his engine loudly and shouted at the injured dog. His words were cruel and ugly, the kind of language that revealed the darkness in his soul. He wanted everyone in the neighborhood to know that he had done this on purpose, that he wasn't afraid of anyone or anything. But Tommy had made a critical mistake. In his moment of twisted triumph, he had forgotten to pay attention to his surroundings. He didn't notice the security cameras on several houses that had recorded everything. He didn't see the neighbors who were now watching from their windows, their phones already out and recording. He didn't realize that his license plate was clearly visible, or that his distinctive steel wolves patches would make him easy to identify. Most importantly, he didn't see the man who had been watching from inside the house where Honey lived. The man had been in his kitchen, making a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, when he heard his dog's cry of pain. He had rescued Honey 3 years ago, nursing her back to health both physically and emotionally. She wasn't just his pet. She was his companion, his friend, and in many ways his reminder that broken things could be healed with enough patience and love. When he looked out the window and saw what had happened, something cold and hard settled in his chest. This wasn't the hot anger that Tommy carried around like a weapon. This was something deeper and more dangerous. This was the quiet fury of someone who had just watched innocence be destroyed for sport. The man was used to playing characters who fought back against bullies and criminals. But this wasn't acting. This was real life, and someone had just hurt the most important thing in his world. As he watched Tommy celebrate his cruelty, the man made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Meanwhile, Honey was trying to understand what had happened to her. The pain in her leg was sharp and constant, but the emotional pain was worse. She didn't understand why the human had hurt her. In her simple mind, humans were supposed to be kind. They were supposed to protect her, not cause her pain. She managed to get to her feet, though she couldn't put weight on her injured leg. Limping badly, she started making her way toward the house, toward the safety and love she knew waited inside. Every step was agony, but she pushed forward because she trusted that help was coming. Tommy watched the dog struggle across the lawn and laughed. To him, her suffering was entertaining. He had no idea that his laughter was being recorded by multiple phones, or that his face was clearly visible to several witnesses. He was too caught up in his moment of power to think about consequences. But consequences were coming, whether he was ready for them or not. The man in the house was already moving, already planning. The neighbors were already calling the police and posting videos online. And somewhere in the distance, forces were beginning to align that would make Tommy wish he had chosen a different street, a different dog, a different target for his rage. As Tommy finally rode away, still laughing, and shouting he thought he had won. He thought he had shown the world who was in charge. He had no idea that he had just picked a fight with someone who had the resources, the connections, and the determination to make sure that justice was served. The quiet street returned to silence, broken only by Honey's soft whimpers as she finally reached her front door. But the peace was gone forever, replaced by something much more powerful. The wheels of justice had started turning, and they wouldn't stop until Tommy learned that some actions have consequences he never could have imagined. The front door opened before Honey could even reach it. A tall man in simple jeans and a faded black t-shirt stepped out, his face showing a mix of concern and something much darker. This was Keanu Reeves. though most of his neighbors knew him simply as a quiet guy who kept to himself and loved his dog more than anything in the world. Keanu had been in Hollywood for decades, playing heroes who fought against impossible odds. But right now he wasn't thinking about movies or fame. He was thinking about the gentle soul whimpering at his feet, the dog who had helped heal his own broken heart after years of personal loss. He knelt down carefully and scooped Honey into his arms. She was heavier than she looked, but he lifted her easily, his hands gentle despite the rage building inside him. Honey looked up at him with confused, trusting eyes, as if asking why someone had hurt her when all she had done was enjoy the morning. "Son." "I know, girl, I know," Keanu whispered, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "We're going to make this right." As he carried Honey inside, neighbors began emerging from their houses. Mrs. Patterson was already hurrying across the street, her face pale with shock. Behind her came Mr. Chen from next door, still holding his morning newspaper, and Lisa Rodriguez from 3 houses down, who had witnessed everything from her bedroom window. "I saw the whole thing," Mrs. Patterson said breathlessly as she reached Keanu's front steps. "That maniac just ran right at her like she was some kind of target. I've never seen anything so cruel in my life." Keanu's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Did anyone get a good look at him? Or his license plate?" "I got it all on video," Lisa said, holding up her phone. "The whole thing. His face, his bike, his license plate, even the patches on his jacket. He wasn't trying to hide what he was doing." Other neighbors were gathering now, drawn by the commotion and the sight of their famous neighbor holding his injured dog. But they weren't treating this like a celebrity sighting. They were treating it like what it was, a community coming together after witnessing something terrible. Keanu had lived in this neighborhood for years, but he kept a low profile. He drove an old pickup truck, wore simple clothes, and did his own grocery shopping. Most people knew who he was, but they respected his privacy. He wasn't the kind of celebrity who threw parties or caused drama. He was just a good neighbor who happened to be famous. But seeing him now, holding his injured dog with such gentle care while barely containing his fury, reminded everyone why his characters resonated with so many people. There was something real about his anger, something genuine about his pain that went beyond acting. "We need to get her to a vet," Keanu said, his voice steady despite everything. "But first, I want to make sure we have everything we need to find this guy." Mr. Chen nodded grimly. "My security camera caught the whole thing too. Different angle than Lisa's phone. Between the 2 videos, we'll have everything the police need." As they talked, more neighbors arrived. The peaceful morning had been shattered, but something else was building in its place. These people had watched senseless cruelty happen in their community, and they weren't going to let it slide. They might not be able to fight a motorcycle gang, but they could make sure the right people saw what had happened. Keanu carefully placed Honey in the passenger seat of his pickup truck, adjusting her position so she would be comfortable for the ride to the emergency vet clinic. She was still whimpering softly, but she trusted him completely. Even in pain, she knew she was safe with him. "Send me those videos," he told Lisa and Mr. Chen. "All of them. And if anyone else got footage, I want that too." Mrs. Patterson stepped closer, her voice shaking with emotion. "That animal needs to pay for what he did. Honey is the sweetest dog in the neighborhood. She's never hurt anyone. She just sits there every morning being friendly to everyone who passes by." Keanu nodded, but he was thinking beyond just catching the biker. He had resources that most people didn't have. He had connections in law enforcement, private investigators who owed him favors, and the kind of influence that could make things happen quickly. More importantly, he had the determination to see this through to the end. "He will pay," Keanu said quietly. "I promise you that." As he drove toward the vet clinic, Keanu's mind was already working. The videos would give them the biker's identity quickly enough. Someone with those Steel Wolves patches wouldn't be hard to track down. Motorcycle clubs like that always had histories with law enforcement, and their members weren't known for being subtle. But this wasn't just about catching one cruel biker. Keanu had seen enough of the world to know that people like Tommy didn't operate alone. They had friends, supporters, maybe even an entire culture that encouraged this kind of behavior. If he was going to protect Honey and make sure this never happened again, he might need to think bigger. The vet clinic was only 10 minutes away, but it felt like an hour. Honey had stopped whimpering, which worried Keanu more than the crying had. He kept one hand on her gently, letting her know he was there while he navigated the morning traffic. With unusual urgency, Dr. Williams had been Honey's vet since the day Keanu adopted her. She was used to seeing celebrities bring in their expensive, pampered pets, but she had always been impressed by how genuinely Keanu cared for his rescue dog. He never missed an appointment, always asked detailed questions about her health, and clearly saw her as family rather than just a possession. When Keanu carried Honey into the clinic, Dr. Williams took one look at his face and knew something serious had happened. She had seen him play intense roles in movies, but this was different. This was real pain and real anger, carefully controlled but burning just beneath the surface. Someone deliberately hit her with a motorcycle, Keanu explained as they rushed Honey into an examination room. Right in front of my house, we have it all on video. Dr. Williams's expression hardened as she began examining Honey. Like most veterinarians, she had seen too many cases of animal cruelty over the years. But something about this felt different. Maybe it was the deliberate nature of the attack, or maybe it was seeing such a gentle dog targeted for no reason other than someone's entertainment. As the examination continued, Keanu's phone started buzzing with messages. The videos were already spreading beyond just the immediate neighbors. Lisa had posted her footage on social media, and it was being shared rapidly. People were outraged, demanding justice for the innocent dog and punishment for the coward who had hurt her. But Keanu wasn't relying on social media justice. He was already making calls to people who could help in more concrete ways. Private investigators who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. Security experts who could enhance video footage to get clearer images. Even some contacts in law enforcement who owed him favors from charity work he had done over the years. The biker who had hurt Honey thought he was just some anonymous tough guy picking on a helpless animal. He had no idea that he had just declared war on someone with the resources to fight back and the determination to win. As Dr. Williams worked to help Honey, Keanu stepped outside to make his calls. The morning sun was still shining, but the peaceful neighborhood feeling was gone forever. In its place was something harder and more focused. Tommy had wanted to feel powerful by hurting something innocent. Soon, he was going to learn what real power looked like. 3 hours after the attack, Keanu's phone rang with the first piece of good news he'd heard all day. Honey was going to be okay. Her leg was bruised but not broken, and Dr. Williams expected her to make a full recovery. Well, physical wounds would heal, but Keanu knew the emotional scars might take longer. "She's tough," Dr. Williams said as they prepared to take Honey home. Rescue dogs often are. They've learned to bounce back from bad situations. Just give her lots of love and patience, and she'll be back to her old self soon. While Honey rested at the clinic, Keanu had been busy. The videos from his neighbors had given him a clear starting point, and his first call had been to Jack Morrison, a private investigator who had worked security for several of Keanu's films over the years. Jack was ex-military, smart, and had connections throughout Southern California that money couldn't buy. The license plate came back to a guy named Tommy Rodriguez, Jack told him over the phone. Goes by Blade in the Steel Wolves Motorcycle Club, 36 years old, lives in a rundown apartment complex in East LA. Got a record longer than my arm, assault, theft, intimidation, disturbing the peace. This isn't his first time hurting someone weaker than himself. Keanu felt his jaw clench as he listened to Tommy's history. 3 domestic violence charges that were dropped when the victims got too scared to testify. 2 counts of animal cruelty from previous incidents. A pattern of targeting people and animals who couldn't fight back. Honey wasn't Tommy's first victim, and she wouldn't be his last unless someone stopped him. There's more, Jack continued. The Steel Wolves have been on law enforcement's radar for years. They're suspected of running protection rackets, drug dealing, and intimidation schemes throughout the city. Problem is, they're smart about it. They keep their hands clean on paper, and witnesses have a habit of changing their minds about testifying. This information didn't surprise Keanu. He'd played enough tough guys to know how these organizations worked. They relied on fear to keep people quiet and used violence just carefully enough to avoid serious legal consequences. People like Tommy felt untouchable because in many ways they were, but Tommy had made one crucial mistake. He had hurt someone who belonged to a person with resources, connections, and the determination to see justice done. Keanu's second call had been to Detective Maria Santos, someone he'd met through charity work with victims of violent crimes. She wasn't officially assigned to this case yet, but she was interested in anything involving the Steel Wolves. The club had been linked to several unsolved cases in her district, and she'd been looking for a way to build a case against them. "The video evidence is solid," Detective Santos told him during their meeting at the police station. "Clear shots of his face, his bike, his license plate, and those club patches. We can definitely charge him with animal cruelty and destruction of property. But here's the thing. Guys like this usually plead down to a misdemeanor, pay a small fine, and walk away laughing." Keanu had expected this. The justice system wasn't designed to handle cases where rich celebrities wanted serious consequences for crimes against their pets. But he wasn't planning to rely solely on official channels. What if there were other charges, he asked. "Bigger ones?" Detective Santos leaned forward, interested. "What did you have in mind?" "Jack Morrison is looking into Tommy's history and his connections to the Steel Wolves. If we can find evidence of other crimes, maybe we can build a bigger case, something that would actually keep him off the streets." This was where Keanu's resources really came into play. Most people who were victims of crimes like this had to rely on overworked police departments and understaffed district attorney offices. They had to hope that someone would care enough about their case to pursue it seriously. But Keanu could afford to hire the best investigators, the best legal experts, and the best technology to build an airtight case. By late afternoon, Jack had assembled a team of 3 other investigators. They were analyzing the neighborhood security footage, looking for evidence of other crimes Tommy might have committed in the area. They were also digging into the Steel Wolves' activities, looking for connections that might give law enforcement the leverage they needed. But the investigation was uncovering something even more disturbing than Keanu had expected. Tommy wasn't just a random bully who happened to hurt Honey. He was part of a systematic pattern of intimidation that had been affecting the entire neighborhood for months. Mrs. Patterson revealed that she'd seen Tommy's motorcycle in the area several times before, always followed by reports of vandalism or threats against elderly residents. Mr. Chen admitted that his car had been keyed 3 weeks ago, the same day he'd seen a Steel Wolves biker cruising slowly past his house. Other neighbors came forward with similar stories once they realized someone was finally taking action. "They've been terrorizing this community," Jack reported back to Keanu, "using fear to keep people from reporting them or standing up to them. Your dog wasn't a random target. She was just the latest victim in an ongoing campaign of intimidation." This revelation changed everything for Keanu. This wasn't just about getting justice for Honey anymore. It was about protecting an entire community that had been living in fear. These were his neighbors, people who had respected his privacy and treated him like family. Now he had the chance to use his resources to help them in a way that really mattered. The videos of Tommy attacking Honey had already gone viral on social media. People around the world were expressing outrage at the senseless cruelty, and many were calling for serious consequences. But social media outrage faded quickly, and Keanu knew that real justice required more than angry comments online. His third call of the day had been to Amanda Rivera, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in Los Angeles. That might seem backwards, calling a defense attorney when you wanted someone prosecuted, but Amanda had agreed to review the case from the other side. If she could identify weaknesses in the evidence or legal strategy, they could address those problems before they became issues in court. "The animal cruelty charge is solid," Amanda confirmed after reviewing everything. "But if you really want to hurt this guy, you need to connect him to the broader pattern of intimidation. Show that this was part of an organized effort to terrorize the neighborhood, and you might be able to get RICO charges against the entire Steel Wolves organization." RICO was the federal law used to prosecute organized crime. If they could prove that the Steel Wolves were running a criminal enterprise, everyone in the organization could face serious federal charges. Instead of Tommy getting a slap on the wrist for animal cruelty, he could be looking at years in federal prison. But building a RICO case would take time, and it would require cooperation from dozens of witnesses who had been too scared to speak up before. Keanu realized he would need to do more than just hire investigators and lawyers. He would need to give his neighbors the courage to fight back. As the sun set on what had started as a peaceful morning, Keanu sat with Honey in his living room. She was resting comfortably, her leg bandaged, but her spirits already improving. Every few minutes she would look up at him with those trusting brown eyes, as if to make sure he was still there. "I promise you," he whispered, gently stroking her fur. "The people who did this are going to learn that actions have consequences, and maybe, just maybe, we can make sure they never hurt anyone else again." Outside, the neighborhood was quiet again, but beneath that surface calm something powerful was building. Tommy had thought he was just picking on another helpless victim. Instead, he had awakened something that would change everything. 1 week after the attack on Honey, Tommy Rodriguez was having the worst day of his life, and he didn't even know it yet. He woke up in his grimy apartment with a hangover and 3 missed calls from his Steel Wolves buddies. Something was wrong, but his beer-soaked brain couldn't figure out what. The first sign of trouble came when he walked outside to start his motorcycle. 2 men in dark suits were standing next to his bike, and they didn't look like the kind of people who wanted to chat about the weather. One was tall and thin with the bearing of someone who had spent years in law enforcement. The other was shorter, but built like a tank, with the calm confidence of someone who wasn't easily intimidated. "Tommy Rodriguez?" the tall one asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Who wants to know?" Tommy replied, trying to sound tough despite the fear growing in his stomach. "FBI," the shorter man said, flashing his badge. "We'd like to ask you some questions about your activities with the Steel Wolves Motorcycle Club." Tommy's blood went cold. FBI meant federal charges. Federal charges meant real prison time, not the local jail where he had friends and connections. But he forced himself to stay calm. They were just fishing, he told himself. They didn't have anything solid. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I just ride motorcycles and work on cars." The tall agent smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "Funny thing about modern technology, Tommy. Security cameras are everywhere these days. And when someone does something really stupid in broad daylight, well, it tends to get recorded." They showed him a tablet with crystal clear footage of him deliberately hitting Honey with his motorcycle. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that they had hours of other footage, him vandalizing cars, intimidating elderly residents, and meeting with other Steel Wolves members to plan their reign of terror over the neighborhood. What Tommy didn't know was that Keanu's investigation had uncovered a massive criminal enterprise. The Steel Wolves weren't just a motorcycle club. They were running protection rackets throughout East Los Angeles, forcing business owners to pay for security and punishing anyone who refused. They were also involved in drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and a dozen other federal crimes. More importantly, over 30 witnesses had finally found the courage to come forward. Keanu had personally met with many of them, assuring them that they would be protected and that their testimony would matter. Business owners who had been too scared to report extortion attempts were now willing to testify. Residents who had suffered in silence were ready to tell their stories in court. "Here's the thing, Tommy," the shorter agent continued. "We've been building a case against the Steel Wolves for 2 years. We just needed someone stupid enough to commit a federal crime on camera and give us the opening we needed. Congratulations, you're that someone." The federal charges were devastating: racketeering, conspiracy, intimidation, animal cruelty under federal law, and a dozen other counts that would keep Tommy in prison for the rest of his life. But the charges against Tommy were just the beginning. By noon that same day, federal agents were arresting Steel Wolves members across Southern California. The clubhouse where Tommy had spent so many nights bragging about his crimes was raided at dawn. Agents found weapons, drugs, stolen property, and detailed records of the club's criminal activities. The Steel Wolves had always thought they were too smart to get caught, but they had made the mistake of keeping records of everything they did. By the end of the week, 43 members of the Steel Wolves were in federal custody. The criminal organization that had terrorized communities across Los Angeles was completely dismantled. Local business owners could finally operate without paying protection money. Elderly residents could walk their dogs without fear of harassment. Children could play in their yards without worrying about motorcycle gangs cruising through their neighborhoods. Tommy sat in his federal holding cell, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. All he had done was hurt one stupid dog. How had that turned into federal charges and life in prison? His court-appointed lawyer had tried to explain it to him, but Tommy's brain couldn't process the magnitude of what had happened. The lawyer had shown him newspaper articles about the case. The headlines talked about a Hollywood hero who had used his resources to bring down an entire criminal organization. They talked about communities finally being free from fear, about justice being served for victims who had suffered in silence for years, but the articles never mentioned Tommy's name. In all the coverage of this massive federal case, he was just the suspect who attacked a beloved actor's dog. His moment of cruel triumph had turned him into a footnote in someone else's story of justice and redemption. Meanwhile, Honey was making a remarkable recovery. Her physical injuries had healed completely, and with Keanu's patient care, her emotional wounds were healing too. She was back to sitting on the front lawn every morning, enjoying the sunshine and greeting neighbors with her gentle tail wag. The Edo neighborhood had changed too. The fear that had hung over the community for months was gone, replaced by a sense of pride and unity. Neighbors who had barely spoken before were now organizing block parties and community watch groups. They had learned that when good people stood together, they could overcome even the most intimidating bullies. Keanu had quietly paid for security upgrades throughout the neighborhood, better lighting, improved alarm systems, and discreet security cameras that would help protect everyone. But more importantly, he had given his neighbors something that money couldn't buy: the knowledge that someone would stand up for them when they needed help. Mrs. Patterson had started a neighborhood newsletter that kept everyone connected and informed. Mr. Chen had organized a community garden where neighbors could work together and build friendships. Lisa Rodriguez had begun teaching self-defense classes for women and elderly residents, showing them that they didn't have to live in fear. On a quiet Sunday morning, 3 months after the attack, Keanu sat on his front porch with Honey sleeping peacefully at his feet. The street looked exactly the same as it had before, but everything was different. Children played in the yards without their parents watching nervously for motorcycles. Elderly residents took peaceful walks without looking over their shoulders. The community had healed stronger than before. Detective Santos stopped by to give him the final update on the case. Tommy had been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The other Steel Wolves members had received sentences ranging from 5 to 30 years. The criminal organization that had plagued Los Angeles for over a decade was gone forever. "You know what the best part is?" Detective Santos said as they watched Honey chase a butterfly across the lawn. "Tommy still doesn't understand what happened to him. He thinks he's a victim of some kind of conspiracy. He can't comprehend that actions have consequences or that hurting innocent creatures makes you the bad guy in the story." Keanu nodded, stroking Honey's fur as she returned to his side. Some people never learn, but maybe his story will teach others to think twice before they decide to hurt someone who can't fight back. As the sun set on the peaceful neighborhood, Keanu reflected on how one moment of senseless cruelty had led to so much positive change. Tommy had wanted to feel powerful by destroying something beautiful and innocent. Instead, his cruelty had awakened a force that protected the innocent and destroyed those who preyed on the weak. Sometimes the good guys really do win, and sometimes the bullies learn that picking the wrong target can change everything.